Welcome. We are just so glad you are here with us today because we're looking at a name you absolutely know, Nikola Tesla.
Oh yeah, everyone knows the name.
Right. But I can almost guarantee that the gap between the cultural myth of this mad scientist and the actual manid is just astonishing.
Mm.
Like we all picture the wild hair, the giant coils, sparks flying
What
everywhere.
classic movie scientist look.
Exactly. But the reality of his life, his mind, and especially his final days, is so much stranger and frankly a lot more profound than that pop culture caricature.
It truly is a remarkable story, and to get to the bottom of who he actually was, we are pulling from a really massive stack of sources today.
A very heavy stack.
Yeah, quite literal. We're looking at his own 1919 autobiography, which is called My Inventions, along with a remarkably dense log of his U.S. patents. We've got historical analyses from PBS and History.com, scientific breakdowns of the famous War of the Currents.
Which we will definitely get into.
Oh, absolutely. Plus records from both the Tesla Science Center at Wardenclyffe and the Nikola Tesla Museum in Belgrade. And we are also pulling really heavily from Mark Cypher's definitive biography, Lizard.
So the mission for this deep dive is threefold. First, we want to unpack how Tesla's incredibly unique brain actually functioned. Second, we're going to trace his journey from a brilliant, highly eccentric oddity to a world-changing inventor.
Yeah.
And finally, we're going to dive into the mystery of what really happened to his final highly classified files after he died. So, okay, let's unpack this a bit, starting with the sheer volume of his output.
It's hard to even wrap your head around.
It is staggering. Looking at the U.S. patent list from our sources, it starts with electric arc lamps and commutators in 1886. And well, before we even go further, for those of us who aren't electrical engineers, what exactly is a commutator?
Right, yeah. Simply put, a commutator is a mechanical switch inside early electric motors. It physically reverses the direction of the electrical current as the motor spins, and that keeps it turning in one direction.
Yeah.
It was a crucial part of early power generation.
Right.
But it was clunky, it caused friction, and it sparked constantly like a real fire hazard.
Got it.
So Tesla recognized very early on that there had to be a better way. And by 1888, he is just rapid-firing patents for entirely new types of electromagnetic motors.
Which brings up the biggest question. I mean, how did one person generate so many complex mechanical concepts so quickly?
Yeah.
He wasn't relying on massive teams of draftsmen, right?
Not at all. To understand his output, you really have to understand his neurology, which was highly unusual. According to his autobiography, his creative process was entirely mental.
Entirely.
Yes. He rarely sat at a drafting table sketching blueprints. Instead, he suffered from what he called a peculiar affliction. He would experience these intense flashes of light, often accompanied by incredibly vivid, superimposed images.
Wow.
Over time, he learned to harness this. He would conceptualize a machine, build it, run it, and even check a turbine for balance entirely in his imagination before he ever touched a single physical tool.
Wait, he could run a machine in his mind and know if it was off balance? That sounds like a superpower.
It really does. He claimed that in 20 years, there was not a single exception to this method. The device always worked exactly as he imagined it.
That is wild.
But the exact same neurological obsession with numbers and patterns that allowed him to run a flawless mental simulation, well, that was also the mechanism behind his crippling daily habits.
Right, because reading about his youth, it's actually pretty heartbreaking. He had a brilliant older brother who died from injuries caused by his spooked Arabian horse.
Yeah, a terrible tragedy.
And Tesla witnessed this. It left him with a massive inferiority complex because his parents were just so grief-stricken that nothing he did could measure up to the memory of his brother.
Which is an impossible shadow to live under.
Exactly. And that trauma seemed to manifest in some intense quirks. Like, he had a violent aversion to women's earrings, especially pearls. The sight of a pearl would almost give him a fit. He would get a fever just from looking at a peach.
It reads as a textbook description of severe obsessive-compulsive tendencies, though obviously that was completely undiagnosed at the time.
He also had this extreme compulsion to calculate the cubic contents of his soup plates and his coffee cups.
Yeah.
If he couldn't do the math, he just couldn't enjoy the meal. He also had to ensure all repeated acts were divisible by 3.
3 was his magic number.
Right. And it is wild to think that the same brain that needed to measure the volume of a soup bowl was the brain that could visualize electromagnetic fields perfectly.
Exactly. His mind was constantly seeking absolute mathematical order in a very chaotic world. And even as a child, he was obsessed with harnessing nature to fit into that order.
Which means I have to bring up the Maybug motor here.
Oh, no.
Yes, because this is the funniest and grossest story from his youth. He wanted to create a motor, so he captured live May bugs, which we call June bugs, and glued them to a spindle.
Just glued live bugs to a wheel.
Yes, the bugs would beat their wings and actually spin the wheel. It was a functioning, insect-powered motor.
A very early renewable energy source.
But the experiment ended abruptly when another boy came along, saw the bugs, and just ate them alive.
So gross.
Tesla was so disgusted, he literally never touched an insect again.
What's fascinating here is how these early experiences, his obsessive need for order and his precise mental modeling really shaped his core philosophy. Tesla eventually came to believe that humans were merely automata.
Automata, like automatons.
Right. He thought we were completely devoid of free will. Just flesh and blood machines responding predictably to external stimuli. He believed so strongly in this mechanistic theory of life that he claimed to feel a literal cosmic pain when people around him were hurt.
Cosmic pain.
Yeah. He saw all of humanity as interconnected cogs in a larger machine.
That philosophy really colors how he interacted with the world, especially when he arrived in America. So picture this for a second. Tesla gets to New York, his money and tickets had been stolen on the journey over, and he literally had to run alongside a moving train to make his departure.
He had a very rough start.
He arrives with practically nothing. But he manages to meet Thomas Edison, and he immediately impresses him by working overnight to fix the completely disabled dynamos, the electrical generators, on the SS Oregon, which was the fastest passenger steamer at the time.
And this begins one of the most famous rivalries in the history of science. Tesla starts working for Edison, putting in grueling hours, from 10:30 in the morning until 5 the next morning, every single day.
That's insane.
It is. And the men were polar opposites. There's that famous story where Edison accurately guessed Tesla's exact weight at 142 pounds.
Oh, yeah. Edison's colleagues were amazed he could guess it so perfectly. And Edison confidentially admitted it was because he used to weigh thousands of hogs a day in a Chicago slaughterhouse.
It perfectly highlights their differences, right? Edison was a practical, hands-on, brute force experimenter from a rough background. Tesla was an aristocratic, highly educated theoretician. And the relationship soured very quickly.
Very quickly.
Edison promised Tesla $50,000 if he could redesign his standard machines to be more efficient. So Tesla completes this monumental task, but when he asked for the payment, Edison told him it was just an American practical joke and completely refused to pay.
Just a joke.
Tesla resigned immediately.
So Edison essentially laughs in his face and steals his bonus. But Tesla doesn't just walk away. He walks right into the arms of Edison's biggest nightmare, which is alternating current.
The war of the currents begins.
Exactly. Looking at the Praxi-Lab source, the breakdown is really clear, but let's make sure we understand the stakes here. Edison was pushing direct current, or DC.
Think of direct current like water flowing constantly in one direction through a pipe. It works well for simple things, but the pressure drops significantly over distance. To power a city with DC, Edison needed a power station practically on every other block, and the wires had to be incredibly thick.
And Tesla, on the other hand, championed alternating current, or AC.
Right. Alternating current is more like water sloshing back and forth rapidly in the pipe. Because of how it behaves, AC can be stepped up to massive voltages, pushed through relatively thin wires across huge distances very economically, and then stepped back down at the destination for safe home use.
Edison was a shrewd businessman, and he knew AC was a superior system for wide-scale distribution, so he launched a desperate smear campaign.
A really ugly one.
He tried to prove AC was deadly, going so far as to publicly electrocute animals to scare people away from Tesla's system. But he couldn't stop the underlying physics. AC was just better.
But earlier you mentioned commutators and the sparking of early motors. How did Tesla actually solve the problem of making an AC motor work efficiently?
That was his ultimate stroke of genius. The problem with early motors was that physical connection, the commutator sparking and wearing down. Tesla realized that if you send two alternating currents into a motor slightly out of phase with each other, you don't even need a mechanical switch.
No switch at all. None. The currents themselves create a magnetic field that rotates on its own. You just put a metal rotor inside, and it chases that spinning magnetic field. No physical contact, no friction, no sparks.
And the moment he actually cracked that rotating magnetic field concept is so cinematic. He was walking in a park in Budapest at sunset with a friend. He was reciting poetry Goethe's Faust, specifically.
Of course he was.
Naturally. And right as he spoke a line about the sun retreating to bring new life, he had one of his famous flashes of insight. He grabbed a stick and drew the diagram for the rotating magnetic field right there in the sand.
And that drawing in the sand is the bedrock of the modern electrical grid. It's the reason you can plug your appliances into wall sockets today. It is how we transport power from massive dams across entire continents directly to your home.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because Tesla didn't stop at the wall socket. Once he conquered the power grid, he started pushing into entirely unknown territories, like the foot selfie.
The foot selfie, yes.
In 1896, Tesla took an X-ray of his own foot. He called them shadowgraphs. In the image, which actually survived, you can clearly see the bones of his foot and the metal nails of his shoe.
He was working on this right alongside the German physicist Wilhelm Röntgen, who gets the historical credit for discovering X-rays. In fact, if Tesla's New York studio hadn't tragically burned down in 1895, destroying all of his equipment and years of notes, he might be the one credited with the discovery.
That fire was devastating.
It was, but there was no bitterness. Röntgen and Tesla exchanged letters of immense mutual respect. Tesla was also one of the first scientists to document the dangers of radiation. He noted skin changes, pain, and hair loss, though, to be fair, he incorrectly blamed the damage on the ozone generated by the rays rather than the radiation itself.
Which leads us to 1899, and one of the wildest images of Tesla's career. I was looking at the PBS photos of his Colorado Springs setup, and it looks like pure science fiction.
It really does.
He moves out to the prairie and builds this incredible 80-foot wooden tower with a roof that could roll back so it wouldn't catch fire. On top of that, a 142-foot metal mast capped with a giant copper ball. What exactly was he trying to do out there on the prairie?
He was trying to figure out if the Earth itself was electrically resonant. He wanted to create electrical effects on the scale of natural lightning to see if he could pump power into the ground and retrieve it anywhere on the globe without wires.
So he essentially decides to play God. He tells his mechanic, a man named Zito, to flip the switch. They generate man-made lightning bolts over 100 feet long.
Just massive amounts of power.
The power is so immense that they inadvertently burn out the dynamo at the El Paso Electric Company, plunging the entire city into total darkness. The power company was furious and made him pay for all the repairs.
Yeah, and while the locals just saw a dangerous eccentric blacking out their city, Tesla was actually doing prophetic science. Based on his experiments there, he calculated that the space between the Earth and the ionosphere had a resonant frequency of 8 hertz.
Okay, pause. I need an explanation on this. What does it mean for the Earth to have a resonant cavity, and what is 8 hertz?
Imagine the space between the ground and the ionosphere, which is a layer of charged particles high up in the atmosphere. Imagine that as the inside of a giant bell.
Okay, a giant bell.
Tesla theorized that if you strike that bell with electrical energy, it will vibrate or ring at a specific frequency. He calculated that frequency to be 8 hertz, meaning 8 cycles per second. He was mocked for this at the time.
Of course.
But in the 1950s, researchers discovered the Schumann resonances, proving that this atmospheric cavity does indeed ring naturally right around 8 hertz.
That is unbelievable. But he also claimed he picked up repeating radio signals on his equipment and thought he was receiving messages from outer space. Was he actually hearing aliens? Or was this just a guy who had been out in the prairie by himself for way too long?
He definitely wasn't hearing aliens, but he wasn't crazy either. It's now entirely plausible he was the first human to detect naturally occurring radio waves from the cosmos, things like signals emitted by Jupiter or distant pulsars.
Wow.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see a man whose scientific intuition was routinely decades, or even a century, ahead of the technology required to actually prove him right.
So he comes back to New York, fully convinced he can transmit power and information wirelessly through the Earth. And that brings us to his ultimate vision, the Warden Cliff facility on Long Island.
His magnum opus.
We are talking about a 187-foot tower with a massive 68-foot spherical terminal on top. He didn't just want to send electricity. He had a vision that sounds exactly like the modern internet.
Very much so.
He wrote about converting the Earth into a huge brain. He predicted a system that could broadcast music, news, stock reports, and secure messages worldwide to a cheap receiver not bigger than a watch. He basically predicted the smartphone in the early 1900s.
It is a stunningly accurate prediction. But Wardenclyffe represents the great tragedy of his life. As detailed in Mark Cypher's biography Wizard, Tesla's brilliance was heavily weighed down by his self-destructive, neurotic tendencies.
He just couldn't play the game.
Right. He was not a practical businessman like Edison. He ran into massive financial troubles, and his primary backer, J.P. Morgan, ultimately pulled his funding. The world wasn't ready, and the financial models of the day couldn't support a system designed to give away power for free.
Because you can't put a meter on free ambient electricity.
Precisely. The project stalled, and in 1917, the magnificent Wardenclyffe Tower was demolished and sold for scrap just to pay off Tesla's debts.
It's devastating.
Yeah.
And it wasn't his only futuristic project that was totally misunderstood.
Yeah.
In 1898, he debuted a remote-controlled boat at Madison Square Garden. People thought it was a magic trick. Or that he was using a trained monkey hidden inside the boat.
A trained monkey?
Yeah. But it was the birth of what he called telematics, which is what we now call robotics and drones.
His philosophy surrounding these drones is deeply complex. Initially, Tesla believed that creating pilotless, remote-controlled weapons would make war so horrifyingly destructive and remove the personal element of combat so completely that humanity would abolish war altogether out of sheer terror.
But he changed his mind about that eventually, didn't he?
He did. He later realized that as long as humans have physical distance from their enemies and as long as national ego exists, there will be strife. He concluded that no weapon could end war. Only the annihilation of distance, meaning global instant communication and universal enlightenment, could actually bring about lasting peace.
That is a profoundly modern understanding of geopolitics. But unfortunately, Tesla's final years were far from peaceful. This brings us to the final act of his life and the great mystery of his missing files. Let's set the scene. It's January 1943. World War II is raging globally. Tesla is 86 years old, deeply in debt, and living alone at the Hotel New Yorker. He dies in his room, and almost immediately the U.S. government swoops in.
Given the context of the war, the government's reaction was swift. Tesla had recently been claiming to the press that he had invented a death ray, a directed particle beam weapon capable of melting airplane motors from hundreds of miles away.
That's a bold claim.
Because of this, the Office of Alien Property immediately seized all of his belongings and documents to ensure nothing fell into enemy hands.
So they take his stuff. What did they actually find? Was there a functional blueprint for a death ray?
This is where the internal U.S. government becomes divided, and we must look at the declassified FBI files impartially here without endorsing any specific theory. The government tasked Dr. John G. Trump, an MIT engineer, with evaluating the papers.
Okay.
Dr. Trump reported that the files were mostly speculative and philosophical, concluding there were no workable, practical principles for a particle beam weapon. He basically stated Tesla was writing science fiction in his final years.
Which makes sense for an 86-year-old man who had been isolated for a long time. But that wasn't the only opinion, was it?
No, it wasn't. Military personnel at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, including Brigadier General L.C. Craigie, evaluated Tesla's concepts and believed the particle beam weapon was a genuine, viable idea.
Really?
Yes. Furthermore, the FBI files, which were finally declassified in 2016 and 2018, show that high-level officials, including FDR's Vice President Henry Wallace and Manhattan Project head Vannevar Bush, were actively discussing the implications of Tesla's wireless energy and his death ray.
Which brings up the issue of the missing trunks. When Tesla's nephew, Sava Kasanovich, was finally declared the rightful heir to the estate, the FBI recorded that there were 80 trunks of materials. But when those belongings finally arrived at the Nikola Tesla Museum in Belgrade, which is now a UNESCO Memory of the World site, there were only 60 trunks.
This raises an important question. Where are the missing 20 trunks? The FBI declassifications haven't fully answered this. It is entirely possible they were simply consolidated or lost in bureaucratic shuffling. However, historically, the concept of Tesla's directed energy weapons didn't die in 1943. In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, widely known as the Star Wars program, heavily explored particle beam weaponry to shoot down missiles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the direct lineage from Tesla's death ray concepts to Cold War defense initiatives fuels the ongoing speculation that those missing 20 trunks contain the practical schematics that Dr. Trump publicly dismissed and that they were quietly retained by the military.
So what does this all mean? When you step back and look at the whole picture, Nikola Tesla is a man defined by incredible dichotomy. He was a visionary who literally saw the future. He laid the foundation for the AC power grid, radio, robotics, and predicted smartphones and the internet.
He saw it all coming.
But he struggled with the human, financial, and practical realities of the era he was born into. He couldn't play the capitalist game like Edison, and it cost him his greatest dreams.
It's a stark reminder of the delicate balance between having a world-changing vision and possessing the practical execution required to bring it to life. But his legacy is still unfolding.
How so?
For example, at the Wardenclyffe site, which was saved by a grassroots campaign and is now being restored as a science center, a film crew using ground-penetrating radar in 2017 discovered a series of mysterious, extensive tunnels deep underneath the property. We still don't know exactly what they were for. Tesla's work isn't just in the history books, it is physically and technologically woven into our present.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that leaves us with one final, provocative thought for you to ponder today. Tesla firmly believed that the Earth itself was a giant, vibrating conductor, just waiting to be tapped for limitless free energy. Think about his track record.
It's pretty solid.
He was right about alternating current. He was right about the 8 Hz resonance of the ionosphere. He was right about robotics. He was right about pocket-size wireless communication. So what if he was right about the Earth, too? Are we currently ignoring a massive natural source of unlimited free energy simply because it doesn't fit into the commercial models of our modern utility companies? It is definitely something to think about the next time you plug your charger into the wall.